Preface. Ethereal Hollywood is a world reconfigured from the golden age of Hollywood, where the legendary stars are not just memories, but immortal archetypes, still living in their own parallel alternative reality. Familiar history is not duplicated but flexible and constantly revisioning itself along diverse pathways. Time and space are also more fluid and less binding. And what has been called magic works in odd and unusual ways, producing scenarios from the silly to the surreal. And since these stories are in an alternative world or dimension, there are variances from real-world facts, such as the relationship between characters, studios, events. This is a fluid world where history flows in unexpected directions. These are audiobooks with imagery synced to the narrative as much as possible, serving as quasi-storyboards to give a rough visual dimension to the stories. Bogie and Marilyn, wandering through the celluloid archetypal zone. Book 6 of the Ethereal Hollywood series. The wind was blowing a crumpled newspaper across the pavement. Humphrey Bogart watched it vanish into deeper shadows, a familiar comfort in the gloom. He pushed open the diner door, its bell jangling like cheap cymbals. Inside, the assault was immediate. The chrome stools gleamed with painful intensity, the vinyl booths screamed bubblegum pink, and the scent of frying onions mingled sickeningly with Bubbles' overpowering cheap perfume. Bogart slumped onto a stool, the world's garish palate pressing against his eyelids. "Coffee," he rasped, the words scraping out like gravel. Black. Across the street, Marilyn Monroe paused beneath a street lamp. Its yellow glow haloed her platinum hair, scattering prismatic flecks onto the sidewalk. Her gaze fixed on the diner window, drawn to the anomaly within, a man shaped like absence, a silhouette carved from old film stock. A delighted shiver ran through her. Something new, something stark. She drifted forward, the traffic lights obediently cycling to green as she reached the curb. The diner door chimed again. Heads swiveled, forks paused midair, the jukebox hiccuped. Bogart saw her reflection bloom in the polished countertop beside his untouched coffee cup, a shimmering vortex of light and color advancing directly toward his island of gray. Her smile, when it came, was blinding. "Oh," she breathed, leaning close enough for her scent, vanilla and champagne fizz, to momentarily eclipse the onions. "You look like you lost your sunshine." Her fingertip, impossibly warm, tapped the bridge of his nose. A tiny, defiant patch of peach-colored skin bloomed where she touched him, stark against the ash. Bogart stared. The world hadn't softened, it had just sprouted a baffling, impossible freckle. He recoiled, knocking over the sugar shaker. White crystals cascaded across the counter like miniature avalanches. "Keep your technicolor tricks to yourself, sister," he growled, swiping at his nose. The warmth remained. Across the counter, Bubbles gaped, her violently blue eyes wide, a smear of that belligerent red lipstick on her coffee pot. Marilyn giggled, a sound like crystal wind chimes. "But it suits you." A little blush, she trailed off, her gaze drifting past him to the diner's grimy window. Outside, the neon sign for the Brown Derby sputtered violently. For a split second, the bleeding colors froze, hardened, then shattered into jagged fragments of light that dissolved before hitting the wet pavement. Marilyn's smile faltered. "Oh dear," she murmured, her voice suddenly thin. "That wasn't supposed to happen." Marilyn clutched the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. The effortless glow around her dimmed, replaced by a flicker of genuine panic in her wide eyes. "It's the dissonance," she whispered, her champagne bubble voice flat with dread. "Us. Touching, it's tearing the seams." The vibrant pink of her dress seemed to bleed slightly at the edges, blurring into the garish vinyl of the stool. Outside, another neon sign, Coconut Grove, flickered violently before its letters dissolved into shimmering motes that vanished like dying fireflies. The pavement beneath it cracked with a soundless fracture that spread impossibly fast across the asphalt. Bogart pushed himself off the stool, the movement deliberate. His gray trench coat settled around him like armor. He didn't understand the rules of this technicolor nightmare, but he understood tearing seams. He understood collapse. The humming intensified, vibrating the coffee cup until its black liquid sloshed violently over the rim, staining the counter like spilled ink. Bubbles shrieked, dropping her coffee pot. It shattered on the linoleum, spraying dark liquid and sharp ceramic fragments, the crash unnaturally loud in the distorted silence that followed the jukebox's final gasp. Bogart ignored it. His eyes locked onto Marilyn's terrified face. "All right, Blondie," he rasped, his voice cutting through the thickening air. "What do we do to stitch this damn thing back together?" The peach spot on his nose throbbed insistently, a painful counterpoint to the world's unraveling. Marilyn pressed a trembling hand to her chest, where the diamond necklace flickered erratically. We have to balance it," she stammered, her usual effervescence replaced by raw urgency. "Too much gray pulls the color thin. Too much color." She gestured helplessly at the window where another chunk of neon detached, dissolving into shimmering dust before hitting the street. The crack in the pavement widened silently, revealing not dirt or bedrock, but a dizzying, swirling vortex of fragmented movie reels and discordant soundtracks, the raw, chaotic stuff beneath Ethereal Hollywood's painted surface. The scent of gardenia vanished, replaced by ozone and hot celluloid. Bogart scanned the diner. The patrons were frozen mid-panic, their faces blurred smears of terrified color. Only he and Marilyn seemed mobile, islands in the stuttering reality. He grabbed her wrist, his touch surprisingly solid against her shimmering skin. It wasn't warmth he felt, but a jolt of shared current, the gray grounding her frantic light. "Balance," he grunted, pulling her towards the door. "Then we move. Fast." Outside, the street lamps pulsed like dying stars. The brown derby sign flickered its last, plunging the immediate world into an eerie, oscillating twilight punctuated only by the dissolving neon fragments raining down from other signs. He shoved the diner door open. The bell didn't jangle, it emitted a choked, metallic groan. Stepping onto the sidewalk felt like stepping onto thin ice. The asphalt shifted sickeningly beneath his worn loafers. Marilyn clung to his arm, her glow dimmed to a protective corona around them both. Ahead, the vortex in the street pulsed, pulling fragments of the crumbling world towards its maw. Bogart tightened his grip on her wrist, the peach spot blazing like a tiny beacon against the encroaching darkness. "All right, sister," he muttered, squaring his shoulders against the howling dissonance. "Let's see if this noir knows how to waltz." He took the first step forward, dragging Marilyn into the teeth of the unraveling street. The vortex wasn't a pit, but a wall of screaming static. Movie frames flashed and tore, a cowboy firing endlessly into nothing, a tap dancer mid-shuffle dissolving into pixels, a monster's roar distorted into bass feedback. Bogart plunged them straight into it. The impact was physical, a sandblaster of fragmented narratives hitting his gray trench coat. Marilyn cried out, a sound swallowed by the roar. He felt her light flicker violently, threatened with extinction. Instinctively, Bogart pulled her closer, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. His dense grayness acted like a shield, absorbing the chaotic barrage. Where his body pressed against hers, the frantic static calmed momentarily, forming a small pocket of relative stillness within the storm. "Balance," Marilyn gasped, her voice thin but clear within their fragile bubble. She lifted a trembling hand, fingers spread towards the maelstrom. A hesitant glow, pale pink and gold, pulsed from her fingertips. It touched a swirling fragment, a scene of a sun-drenched beach, and the fragment stabilized, its colors deepening. But instantly, another fragment nearby, a stark black and white detective scene, began to fray violently. Bogart saw it. He thrust his free hand towards the detective scene. His grayness flowed outwards, not as color, but but as solidity, as shadow. The fraying edges knit together, the scene regaining its sharp, monochrome clarity. The beach scene pulsed warmly beside it. For a single, suspended heartbeat, the dissonance lessened. The vortex seemed to hesitate, confused by the opposing forces stabilizing fragments instead of consuming them. They stood locked in the eye of the storm, Bogart radiating anchoring grayness, Marilyn emitting cautious light. Each stabilized fragment created a tiny anchor point, but the effort was immense. Sweat beaded on Bogart's brow, staining his gray collar dark. Marilyn's glow wavered, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The vortex recoiled slightly from their combined effort, the swirling chaos slowing. Ahead, through the thinning static, Bogart glimpsed something solid, the familiar, grimy brickwork of an alleyway wall, untouched by the dissolution. An escape route. He met Marilyn's wide, terrified eyes. "Keep painting, Blondie," he rasped, his voice strained but steady. "We're almost through." He took another step, pulling her towards the solid brick, their opposing energies weaving a desperate, temporary path through the collapsing dreamscape. The alley embraced them with sudden, profound silence. The vortex's roar vanished, replaced by dripping water and distant sirens, sounds blessedly real and muted. Bogart leaned against the damp brick, sucking in air that tasted of rain and garbage. Marilyn slumped beside him, her glow reduced to a faint shimmer, like dust motes catching stray light. She touched the diamond necklace at her throat, its sparkle dulled. Bogart glanced down. The peach spot on his nose remained, a stubborn, undeniable splash of color against the ash-gray planes of his face. It didn't hurt anymore, it just was. Proof. He pulled his fedora lower, shielding his eyes. "Balance," he muttered, the word tasting bitter. "Seems we tip the scales just by breathing the same air." Marilyn pushed a stray platinum curl from her forehead, her usual effortless grace replaced by weary fragility. She studied Bogart, truly studied him, beyond the novelty of his grayness. The lines etched deep around his eyes, the grim set of his jaw, they spoke of a different kind of struggle, one fought in shadows long before Technicolor bled into existence. "It wasn't just touching," she whispered, her voice regaining a sliver of its musical lilt, tinged now with awe. "It was resonance." She gestured vaguely towards the alley mouth where the vortex had raged. "Your shadow, my light," they hummed together. Her gaze drifted back to his nose. "And that's the harmony." A small, genuine smile touched her lips, devoid of its earlier blinding artifice. "You're not just gray anymore, Mr. Bogart." Bogart grunted, pushing off the wall. The alley stretched before them, a comforting canyon of grime and shadow. He scanned the rooftops, the fire escapes, the familiar geometry of noir. The peach spot pulsed faintly, a warm counterpoint to the cool gloom. He knew the rules had changed. Ethereal Hollywood wasn't just leaking color, its very fabric was reacting to their proximity. Balance wasn't a state, it was a constant negotiation. He adjusted his trench coat, the familiar gesture grounding him. "Harmony sounds like trouble," he stated flatly, his eyes narrowing as he spotted a flicker of unnatural violet light deep within the alley's recesses. "Let's move, Blondie, before the next chorus starts." He started walking, deeper into the shadows, the faint echo of Marilyn's hesitant footsteps following close behind. Marilyn trailed him, her steps light but deliberate on the uneven pavement. The alley's dampness seemed to cling to her, dimming her usual radiance into something softer, more vulnerable. She watched Bogart's broad back, the way his gray form absorbed the scant light. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question wasn't just about direction, it was about purpose in this unraveling world. Bogart didn't slow. "Somewhere quiet," he rasped. "Somewhere the Technicolor circus hasn't pitched its tent." He gestured ahead with a tilt of his head towards a battered metal door half hidden beneath a rusted fire escape. A faded sign above it read, "The Velvet Vault," its letters peeling into obscurity. It looked like the kind of place Color avoided. They reached the door. Bogart tested the handle, solid, unyielding. He knocked twice, sharp and precise. Silence answered. Then, a small slot slid open at eye level. Two shrewd, dark eyes peered out, scanning Bogart, then lingering on Marilyn with undisguised suspicion. The eyes narrowed. Password. The voice was gravelly, older than the bricks. Bogart leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a low growl. "The Maltese falcon flies at midnight." A pause. The slot snapped shut. Bolts scraped heavily inside. The door groaned open, revealing a dimly lit interior smelling of stale cigar smoke and damp velvet. The eyes belonged to a wizened man in a worn vest, his face a roadmap of wrinkles untouched by any hint of garish hue. He nodded curtly at Bogart. "Humphrey." His gaze flickered to Marilyn, a flicker of disapproval in his eyes. "She stays outside." Marilyn drew herself up, a spark of her old defiance returning. "I go where he goes," she stated, her voice regaining a sliver of its champagne fizz. The wizened man snorted. "Not in here, lady. This place runs on shadow. You bring too much glare." Bogart stepped forward, placing himself between Marilyn and the doorman. He met the old man's gaze squarely. "She's with me, Sid. And she stays." He didn't raise his voice, but the command in it was absolute, forged in 1,000 backroom deals and dark alleys. Sid glared, his jaw working. He looked from Bogart's implacable gray face to the stubborn set of Marilyn's chin, then down at the undeniable peach spot blooming on Bogart's nose. His scowl deepened, but he shuffled back a grudging step, muttering under his breath about damned Technicolor complications, as he waved them both inside. The heavy door thudded shut behind them, sealing them into the hushed, sepia-toned sanctuary of the Velvet Vault. The air inside was thick with the scent of aged whiskey, leather, and dust. Dim amber bulbs cast deep pools of shadow, leaving corners in near-total darkness. Patrons hunched over scarred wooden tables, men in fedoras pulled low, women whose sequins had long since lost their sparkle. It was a refuge for faded stars and forgotten scripts, a pocket of ethereal Hollywood stubbornly clinging to its monochrome roots. Sid shuffled ahead, leading them towards a secluded booth draped in velvet curtains darker than Bogart's coat. Marilyn instinctively dimmed her own glow, her diamond bracelet catching the low light softly, no longer scattering rainbows. She felt strangely muted here, like a vibrant painting hung in a tomb. Bogart slid into the booth, the worn leather sighing beneath him. Sid lingered, his shrewd eyes fixed on Marilyn. "Heard the ruckus outside," he rasped. "Streets bleed and light. Worlds comin' apart at the seams." He jabbed a gnarled finger towards Bogart's nose. "And that ain't natural." Bogart lit an imaginary cigarette, the phantom smoke curling into the dim light. "Seams tore when we touched, Sid." Proximity." Sid hissed through his teeth. "Proximity. Kid, you're a walking negative. She's a damned supernova. You get too close, you ain't just tearin' seams. You're riskin' a full-blown meltdown." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "They're talkin' already. The powers that be. They see that spot on your mug. They see her dimmed. They don't like anomalies. They like their stories neat." His gaze flickered towards the curtained entrance, heavy with unspoken warning. The comfortable gloom of the Velvet Vault suddenly felt less like sanctuary and more like the quiet before an execution. Marilyn shivered, pulling her wrap tighter. The peach spot on Bogart's nose pulsed faintly, a warm, undeniable beacon in the cool shadows. Sid straightened, his expression grim. "You need to split, now, before the cleanup crew arrives." He nodded towards a narrow service door at the back, barely visible behind stacked crates. That leads to the old studio backlots. Maze out there. Might buy you time. Bogart met Sid's eyes, a flicker of understanding passing between them, the unspoken debt, the shared history etched in noir. He pushed himself up from the booth, the movement decisive. Marilyn followed instantly, her earlier defiance replaced by a focused urgency. Sid watched them go, his face unreadable in the gloom. As Bogart pushed open the service door, revealing a desolate expanse of crumbling plaster facades and skeletal scaffolding under a bruised twilight sky, Sid's final whisper chased them into the wind, "Run, Humphrey. And keep that damn light away from your shadow." The door clicked shut, leaving them alone in the echoing ruins of forgotten dreams. The backlot stretched before them like a graveyard of narratives. A dusty western street ended abruptly at a painted jungle backdrop. A castle turret loomed beside a spaceship hull half buried in weeds. Bogart scanned the chaotic landscape, his instincts sharpening. He felt the low hum returning, vibrating up through the soles of his shoes, the dissonance tuning itself again. Marilyn stayed close, her glow dimmed to a protective haze. "Which way?" she breathed, her eyes darting nervously. Bogart didn't hesitate. He headed towards the deepest shadow, a canyon formed by towering, false brick tenements. Away from the hum, he growled. The peach spot flared as he moved, reacting to the thickening tension in the air. They wove through the skeletal remains of sets, the silence broken only by the crunch of gravel underfoot and the distant, unsettling crackle of dissolving reality. They rounded the corner of a faux brownstone and froze. Standing in the center of a cobblestone street set, bathed in an unnatural violet spotlight, was a figure. Tall, impossibly thin, clad in a suit of shimmering, shifting grays that seemed to absorb the light. Its face was a smooth, featureless oval, reflecting the crumbling facades around them like a distorted mirror. No eyes, no mouth, just pure, unsettling observation. The violet agent. Sid hadn't been exaggerating. It turned its blank face towards them with unnerving silence. The dissonance hum spiked, vibrating the air itself, making Marilyn gasp and Bogart grit his teeth. The agent raised one long, gray hand, palm outwards. A wave of pure negation washed over them, a force that sought to bleach Marilyn's light and deepen Bogart's gray into oblivion. It wasn't an attack, it was an erasure. Bogart reacted instantly. He shoved Marilyn sideways behind a plaster lamppost, taking the brunt of the wave himself. It hit like icy water, leaching warmth, threatening to solidify his very essence. He staggered, the world graying at the edges. But the peach spot on his nose blazed fiercely, a counterpoint of defiant warmth. Marilyn, shielded, flung out her hand. Not light this time, but pure, resonant sound, a single, crystal-clear note that shattered the oppressive silence. It struck the violet agent like a physical blow. The agent recoiled, its mirror face flickering, reflecting fractured images of Marilyn's terrified face and Bogart's grimace. The negation wave faltered. Bogart seized the moment, lunging not at the agent, but towards a nearby lever marked, "Scene Change." He slammed it down. With a groan of protesting machinery, the entire cobblestone street tilted violently, sending the agent sliding backwards into a suddenly opening trapdoor labeled, "Dungeon." The trapdoor slammed shut. The violet spotlight winked out. Silence crashed back, thick and heavy, broken only by their ragged breathing and the fading echo of Marilyn's note hanging in the dusty air. The peach spot glowed like an ember in the sudden gloom. Marilyn pressed a trembling hand to Bogart's arm. "Your nose," she whispered. The peach patch pulsed rhythmically now, casting faint amber light on the plaster dust coating his trench coat. Bogart touched it gingerly. It felt hot, alive. "Harmony," he muttered, the word tasting strange. "Seems it cuts both ways." He scanned the silent backlot. The dissonance hum had retreated, but the air still thrummed with latent tension. Sid's warning echoed, "Run." He jerked his head towards a cluster of leaning Egyptian pillars. They'll send more. Cleanup crew doesn't quit. Marilyn nodded, her usual radiance banked to a focused, wary shimmer. She moved silently beside him, her steps avoiding loose gravel, her presence pulling the shadows around them like a cloak. The backlot felt less like a maze and more like a hunting ground now. Every crumbling facade could hide another agent. Every beam of twilight could be a spotlight. They navigated deeper into the labyrinth of forgotten sets, Bogart instinctively choosing paths that maximized cover and shadow. The peach spot acted like a compass needle, flaring brighter whenever the subtle dissonance hum intensified nearby, warning them to detour. Marilyn moved with surprising stealth, her innate understanding of light allowing her to blend into patches of gloom. They passed a tilted pirate ship half sunk in sawdust, sand, its rigging creaking like ghostly bones. Bogart paused, listening. Beneath the creak, faint and metallic, the scrape of a boot on metal scaffolding overhead. He froze, pulling Marilyn flat against the ship's barnacled hull. Above, silhouetted against the bruised sky, another violet agent perched, its featureless head slowly panning the desolate landscape below. It hadn't spotted them, yet. Bogart met Marilyn's wide eyes. Escape wasn't enough. They needed to vanish. He pointed towards a dark maw beneath the ship's forecastle, an access hatch hanging open, promising deeper darkness. Marilyn understood. They slipped inside, the hatch closing behind them with a soft, final click, plunging them into the stale, pitch-black belly of the ghost ship. The only light was the persistent, rhythmic pulse from Bogart's nose, painting their faces in fleeting amber glimpses. The air inside was thick with the smell of damp wood and old rope. Bogart felt his way along a slimy bulkhead, Marilyn's hand gripping the back of his trench coat. The peach spot's glow illuminated swirling dust motes and the skeletal ribs of the ship's interior. It was cramped, claustrophobic, but blessedly silent. No hum. No scraping boots. Marilyn sank onto a moldering crate, exhaustion etching lines onto her usually flawless face. What now? Her voice was a threadbare whisper in the dark. Bogart leaned against the curved hull, the wood cool against his back. He watched the pulse of light reflected in her weary eyes. We wait, he rasped. Let the hounds lose the scent. Outside, faintly, they heard the scrape of metal again, moving away. The peach spot dimmed slightly, its rhythm slowing. For now, the ghost ship held them. But Bogart knew, harmony wasn't a refuge, it was a target, and the violet agents were just the opening act. The real powers that be were still out there, watching the unraveling seams, waiting for their next move. He pulled his fedora lower over the glowing spot, letting the darkness swallow them whole. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Marilyn's breathing steadied, her glow reduced to the faintest shimmer, like moonlight on water. Bogart remained motionless, listening to the creak of the ship's timbers, old wood settling, not pursuit. The peach spot's pulse was a steady metronome against his skin, a constant reminder of the impossible bond anchoring them. He shifted, the damp wood biting through his coat. Marilyn stirred. It feels quieter, she murmured, her voice tentative. The tearing. Bogart grunted, acknowledging it. Their proximity wasn't straining the fabric here, it was reinforcing it, weaving a fragile patch over the hole they'd ripped. He touched the warm spot. It felt less like a wound now, more like a shared heartbeat. Outside, a distant siren wailed, Ethereal Hollywood's normal chaos, not the dissonance's scream. They'd bought time, not safety, time to breathe, to think. Sid's warning echoed. Keep that light away from your shadow. Impossible. Their light and shadow were the same damn song now. Bogart slid down the bulkhead, settling onto the damp floorboards beside Marilyn. His gray trench coat pulled around them both. Rest, Blondie, he muttered, his voice rough but low. The next act's coming. He closed his eyes, the peach spot glowing softly in the dark hold, a tiny beacon in the belly of the beast. Marilyn leaned her head against his shoulder, her light dimming completely, trusting his shadow. For the first time, the silence felt like peace. Fragile, stolen, but real.